So we are going to switch gears just briefly, getting back to being future focused, because as you know, we are reconstructing many of our buildings K-8. And part of that, the scope and design work that came through also meant that we were going to have to take a look at our catchment areas so that we're populating those buildings in an appropriate way, that we can balance the district simultaneously as we reconfigure our K-8 facilities. So that's what we're here to do tonight, is just to bring you up to speed. Some of this information is going to be familiar to you because we've presented in FFLA and BIC. There may be a few more details on here, but largely what we're going to do is go through the information that we've been delivering to PTOs. So over the last several weeks, we've been meeting with PTOs, collecting a little bit of feedback, and I think we just have a couple more buildings to go, and then we'll have had a chance to connect with all the PTOs by then, and then we'll take a look at next steps moving forward. So here with me tonight, we have Paul Wills, Rob Durecka, two gentlemen that you are very familiar with, and they're going to get us going through some of the information that we've been presenting to the PTOs, as well as talk about some of the next steps. So Rob and Paul, if you can hear me, I was able to hear you. You can go ahead and jump into that first slide. David, we're probably ready for that slideshow.
All right, well, hey, thank you, Board of Education, for having us here tonight, and this has been some exciting work. I know it's one of the byproducts of a bond, and our PTOs that we've been meeting with have good questions and so forth, and we'll get into it. We'll show you our agenda that we've shared with them, and some of the work that's happened so far. So on this slide here, as you can see, a big chunk of this is really kind of setting the stage for our community about where we are right now, what's happened with the process thus far, and kind of giving them a current state and a look at our future state, as well as how that fits in with enrollment, with projections and so forth. It's been a pleasure working with both Todd and with Paul, and Paul brings in the plant Moran Cressa viewpoint that we've known for a long time on enrollment, which is very helpful. So at any rate, setting that stage, we have the current middle schools of two that are organized 4th through 8th grade and one that houses 5th through 8th grade. And we're and as we're sharing with our PTOs, by fall of 23, we'll remain we'll still have 4 elementary schools, and we'll have 2 middle schools. So we talk a little bit about where the sites are, current Lasser site for North Hills, and obviously the BHMS site for South Hills. And then also we talk about how the elementaries will be right-sized and reflective of not only equity and inclusion, but in a very meaningful way, aligned curriculums and so forth. So with that, we also are emphasizing that no decision has been made. It's not going to be, the recommendation will come to the board in the fall of 2021. But from a process standpoint, as we move to the next slide, I think it was very important process-wise that early on, April 5th, we had our first meeting, and we did that with Superintendent Watson, his cabinet, and we included our transportation. We also included enrollment. Margaret was there, and as Howard alluded to earlier, and hearing Margaret and Jen and their team present, it was great to hear all the great things that are happening in special ed, but also when we're doing work that encompasses catchment areas, we wanted to make sure that we had guiding principles to move forward with that work, and our board members that were there as well. You can see some of the statements in here are reflected there. If you look at the top of this graphic, I think the one thing that really, it stands out to honor choices has been a question that we've been receiving. We'll get into that in a little bit, but a collective identity. The beauty of this is that we'll have a 4-2-1 organization, and we're all moving to be Blackhawks at the end of that race, and having gone through melding 2 high schools and 2 identities in my previous life, that collective identity as a community is so important. And then as you go clockwise around this, we will have an opportunity to look at future catchment areas every 3 to 5 years is one of the principles that were put in place from the meeting with superintendent and his cabinet, as well as the players from the elementary and middle school buildings and so forth were in that meeting. But again, we're committed to equal size enrollment for all 4 elementaries, shooting for a number of about 550, and 2 middle schools that reflect equitable demographics with proximity to neighborhood schools. And I think that was really a great conversation that we had internally with Margaret, with enrollment. And it's not moving folks around by demographic, it's providing equal access and opportunity for students in the neighborhood schools where they live. And then the last one here is we're committed to looking through all decisions, again, with that equity, access and opportunity for all. So that kind of sets the parameters. And then if we could move to the next slide. We spent our time with PTOs talking about demographics and trends and where we are with that. And that's where Paul has the expertise and has done a fabulous job sharing where we are with live births. So Paul, I'll hand it over to you right now.
Thanks, Rob. And again, a lot of the board members have probably seen this presentation in terms of the births before. Some questions we get is, what's happening with COVID? Sometimes there's a little satire like, oh my gosh, this, social distancing, staying at home is going to have this huge baby boom. Actually, the Brookings Institute's been tracking it for the last year and a half, and they're actually projecting 500,000 less children being born in the next year or two as a direct relation to COVID. The birth rate still is continuing to fall. So for the first time since 1940, the number of births in Michigan is just about 100,000. I think as Trustee Barron mentioned, a lot of the schools in Bloomfield were built in the 1950s and 60s. In the middle of your screen there was really the height of the baby boomers in 1956, 57, 58. So again, the districts made the hard but right choice going from 2 high schools down to 1. And obviously through the support of the bond program, the community is going from this 3 high schools to 2. And ultimately, reinvesting at the elementary level. Next slide. So again, we've taken a look. We update this actually on a quarterly basis for Bloomfield Hills schools. So we look at what's happening in the Polygon, what's happening in the county as a whole, as well as the state of Michigan. And thank you to Sandra and her group in the Pupil Accounting Office. We know there was a slight decrease of enrollment at the kindergarten level, primarily due to COVID. And I think some of the numbers that we're hearing are stronger and kind of returning back to maybe pre-COVID dates going forward. So again, next slide. So part of the demographics we're looking at is the number of households. What's the age of the householder themselves? So the median age right now in Bloomfield, in that boundary, is roughly 61.4. So again, we're not going to see a lot of that 0 to 5 cohorts coming into the district, but really at that upper elementary, middle school, and high school, which is going to allow the district to maintain level enrollment. The public versus private is relatively stayed the same. It's roughly 76.254% to the public and about 23.76% for private at the K-12 level. We also pointed out at the PK level, there's a pretty good opportunity. Roughly 55% are choosing a tuition base. So again, as part of the bond looks at creating these PK centers with some of the other facilities, might be a good opportunity to really take a look at that target demographic and potentially pull these students into the district. One of the things we've found is once kids are in the pipeline with the Bloomfield Hills schools, they tend to stay for their K-12 experiences. Next slide. So again, this is just the trends back for the next 5 years. You can kind of see the 0 to 5 on the lower right-hand side. Again, about 100 student drop in the next 5 years. So we are starting to see that level off, and we'll explain why that is. You can see that next cohort, which is your current elementary middle school, it's 6 to 11, kind of in the middle. Just over 100 student drop, about a 200 student drop at the high school level and middle school level currently. So I think on the next slide, you'll kind of see why that is. Again, this is the birth rates in Oakland County. So these actually get audited by the Department of Human Health Services. And if you take a look at the year 2000 birth year, that was the highest in Oakland County really since 1990, just over 16,200 births. This past year, for the first time really, again, as I mentioned, since 1940, there's less than 13,000 births in Oakland County. And so this is going to have a pretty dramatic impact, not just to Bloomfield Hills schools, but to districts around Southeast Michigan. So again, you're looking at roughly 3,000 less births in a 10-year time period. So again, we take a look on the next slide. is not just the straight births, but we're also taking a look at that geographic information system. Again, Bloomfield still has a very strong housing market. Interest rates are still historically low, so people are having an opportunity to move into the district themselves. Again, primarily at the middle school and high school levels, again, which is allowing the district to maintain level enrollment. So it's not just a straight cohort, but we are adjusting that enrollment demographic as we go forward. So on the next slide. I don't expect you to read this too closely. Again, what it really is showing is that your capture rate over the last 7 years, so that thick black line that you see in the middle of your slide there, everything to the left is historical. So again, this is audited by the Department of Education, and this is how you get your foundation allowance based on your fall and spring counts. So the district's been able to capture from 2.3% almost to 3% in 2019-20. With COVID impact, again, that slipped about 2.69%, about 0.2% drop. Again, we do see very strong growth at the grades 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th, kind of leading to 9th grade. So again, that's how the district's been maintaining its level enrollment of roughly 5,500 students going forward. So next slide. So what are the analysis we take from your 5-year enrollment projections? Really, what does it look like from a K-5 configuration, a 6, 8, 9, 12, knowing that in 2023, when the middle school programs are up on and running, what does that look like? So roughly 2,200 students at that K-5, which goes back to Mr. Durecka's comment of roughly 550 students at the elementary schools, about 1,200 students at 6-8, which is roughly 600 students at the middle school level, and of course, roughly 1,700 students at the high school level for the next 10 years. Next slide. Taking the same exact information, just putting more in a graphical format. So great job.
That's it.
Just creating this level enrollment for you going forward. Next slide. So as Mr. Durecka said, we took a look at the existing boundary maps. So just to familiarize the PTOs and others with the catchment areas. Conant's kind of in the lower left-hand side of the screen. You've got Eastover up on the right-hand side. The far left side in purple, you've got the Lone Pine, and then right in the middle, kind of west of Woodward, you've got the Way Elementary. And again, this is the current 2021 boundary map. On the next slide. We're working with transportation, really taking a look at where the concentration of students are currently. And again, looking at the trend models, not just for district-wide, but actually for each individual boundary level at the elementary level. One of the things you see here is the key right above that. So again, in the current configurations at Conant, there's about 411 students in the K4 currently in the facility. Eastover is about 436 students, kind of in the purple in the upper right. Way Elementary just below 400 students in the yellow, kind of in the middle. And then you look at Lone Pine over in the far left in the purple blue, if you will. But you can see the disparagement between the enrollment. So Lone Pine just under 300 students, Eastover almost at 450 students. So again, looking at that of how do you create, for instance, specials. If you have a much smaller population, very much harder to have a in-house or in-building specials going forward versus traveling. So again, that's some of that educational equity that will come out of the bond. Again, having education drive construction. The next slide. So again, taking a look at 2023, once you take back to the K-5, East Hills actually jumps up to 647 students. Again, a very, very large elementary school at that time point. Way Elementary goes up to about 489, Conant about 500 students, and West Hills just under 500 students. So as you can see, if the goal for 2023 is to have a balanced enrollment of roughly 550 students, the district's going to look at an east to kind of west migration. And so we've taken a really hard look at what are those neighborhoods that are on both sides of each of the boundary areas going forward. We're still in the preliminary phases of that in terms of getting that information from both transportation as well as the demographic software that we use for that, looking at the number of students, who's choosing public versus private, and really coming up with various options. So as Mr. Durecka mentioned, we met with a lot of the PTOs. I think further in the slide, you'll see some other dates of really coming up with options which kind of align with your goals and objectives. The next slide. So we do the exact same at the middle school. So again, it's not just an elementary review, but really what happens at the middle school, knowing that you're going to go from 3 to 2 facilities. So again, we have the 2021 enrollment. Again, West Hills of 558. Now keep in mind, this is grades 4 through 8. And then you've got East Hills, also grades 4 through 8 with roughly 597 students. And of course, Bloomfield Hills Middle School, grades 5-8 with 753 students. So quite a significant difference between the 3 middle schools relative to enrollment. So the next slide. Again, as Mr. Durecka mentioned, the goal is roughly 600 students at each middle school. So again, how does that elementary boundary ultimately feed up to the middle school programs themselves? So again, at the end of the day, it's not just a straight, move this neighborhood here to here, but it's really coming up with areas A, B, C, D, or areas 1, 2, 3, and 4 for the various neighborhoods that kind of align each of the boundaries to give some flexibility of discussion. So I think one of the goals is, looking at low impact versus high impact transitions. More importantly, what does this look like in the next 3 to 5 years? Really to help set the district on a path of creating equal attendance and catchment going forward. So next slide. So I'll turn it back over to Mr. Durecka.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you to Todd. Todd has been able to be a part of these meetings as well, and some of our PTO meetings, still trying to balance his regular job as well. So I should have mentioned that earlier. At any rate, so far, it's an ongoing project, but we've prepared so far we've had a study at the enrollment projections. The targets are established. The boundary maps and polyplots, we've worked with those some, but we have not, and we worked with our district leadership team to do some drafts of that. But our next big steps really involve, and we presented to FFLA, BIC, Board of Ed, tonight, obviously, and our PTOs and building administration. But moving forward, the next big step is really we're going to finish with our PTOs. I think we have our last one actually May 11th, but it'll be fine. I mean, the way community will be seeing that as well. But prior to that, we are getting a community catchment area task force together. Right now, Rebecca has the invite list, representative across the district, and we'll get into scenarios like Paul referenced of 1, 2, and 3 about this is how many kids live in this particular neighborhood. This is how far they'd be from their school, and we'll provide different options for them, catchment areas and so forth. And that would be an opportunity for them to provide feedback for us, and then we can take that to the district leadership team for further development. Over the summer, we will also continue to survey our community. And then after the first fall count, we'll present our findings and final recommendation to the Board of Ed. And that'll be coming from Mr. Watson. I'm sure will be the person presenting that. But at this point in time, it's important to know that with the PTOs that we have met and so forth, within your board packets, you will have some of the initial comments that we received from our PTO meetings. And the questions don't have to be answered right now, but they're going to be around the notion of some of the feedback we've received would be, who's impacted, what would be the process for transfer, and who would be grandfathered, and those kind of things. So I mean, those are part of the bigger discussion, but also some of the piece that we talked about with the actual guiding principles that are so important is that notion of having a collective identity, because our 4 elementaries are going to be right size, they're going to have common curriculums, and these kids will all matriculate eventually to be Blackhawks is the goal. So, some of those early worries and so forth and peer groups and such are important, but that has been probably out of the 15 comments we've received so far, hasn't been a ton of data, but that has been one of the areas that parents are concerned about. So I think that might be our last slide. Yes.